Right, so now what we want to do is create the relevant API based on the params in here, but also the API should match the data we have in our destinations file. So in here, we only have 10 objects or 10 destinations that we want to cover. So therefore, if you do /11, for example, the API will fail because we don't have anything for 11 in here. So let's go ahead and do that. So all we need to do is go into follow the same pattern here, which is ID and then whatever the route is. So in API destinations, we just create a new file in here within the folder of ID /route.ts like that. And essentially we can just copy this, paste that in because it is a get request that we need, but there's a bit more to it. So in here now, and actually what I will do is we do need this, but we'll delete that for now. In here, we get access to the request object. So what we can do is destructure the params like so, and let's get access to the request object if we need it, which we probably won't, but let's just add it in anyway. And this request object is of type request from, see if we can import that in, or actually it just covers it itself, so that's fine. And then again, the params type is of promise, so let's just paste in what we have and save. So we have the params that we're getting, and then the ID, the promise ID of string in here, which is essentially the same on the page. So if we go in here, we need to actually update this. So let's just update that as well. So in here now, we basically wrap this object in a promise like so. Now we save that because we're async awaiting it in here. And then in here now, what we want to do is we want to get access to the ID. So export async function, get access to the ID. So we need to await in here. Then we want to return, but we need to do some filtering or finding first of all. So you can do either, but I'm going to do a variable, so const, or you can call it single destination, whatever it may be. And essentially it's destination.find. For each destination that we have, we want to return destination.id of string equal to the ID here of the string. So this ID is a string, but this one is a number, I believe. So all we need to do is do dot to string on here, like so. So now we have access to the destination, which essentially is what we have, which is the relevant one. So the params will say the ID is 4, for example. So then all we need to do is find the relevant one in this destinations object in here. So if it is 4, then it will return this object of Barcelona in the API. So that's how simple it is. If there's no destination in here, what we want to do is do response.json, and this JSON response will be destination not found of the status of 404 like that. Otherwise, we just need to do response.json. And again, you could have done it in here, but all we need to do now is pass in this destination like so. Save that. And that's how simple it is to create the API. We want to test this out now. So let's go in here and type in /API/destinations. And the first one we want is 4, which was Barcelona. So we should get Barcelona back. And you can see why it's not happened because I didn't type in API properly. So let's try that again. And now you can see here that it's saying Barcelona is back as a return. So let me just do 400, for example. And you can see now it says destination not found. So if destination not found, then it means that obviously it's out of the 10 that we have. So if we do 10, you can see it returns Bali in here. So that is how simple it is to create the API in Next.js. But what we want to do is essentially the tricky part is this API is localhost 3000, but the main base path gets generated when we deploy onto Vercel. So you can see these bits here are what get deployed onto Vercel. So you need to bear that in mind as well. We will cover that. So that's when we use the environment variables to determine the base path. So going back in our API now, we've got the API set up. So now we can kind of fetch using this method over here. So let me just close this one down. We can close the destinations down. So now we have access to, again, the ID in the params. We can then pass this on to a function that we need to declare. So let's go ahead and create that function. So in my destination page, I want to create a function called fetch destinations or whatever it may be. So again, we need to create this function. And what I'm going to do now is this is where we have server actions. So in server actions, we can do all of this stuff on the server. So again, because this is an async function, we can do this on the server. So let me just create a new folder in our app folder in here. So this is going to be a new folder called actions. This is what I'm going to call it. And in here, I'm just going to create a file called fetch.ts. So this is where all of my fetch commands will live. And essentially, what I want to do is create this function, which is fetch destination, which takes in an ID. So let's go ahead and do that, which is quite simple. It's export const fetch destination is an async function. Again, that's fine. And I'm actually just going to bring in what I have, paste that in, and we'll go through it. So the base path, which is what I was talking about, which is process.env.next public URL. So we need to define that next public URL. So in here, we need to create public URL. So let's go ahead at the types level or the tsconfig level. Let's do .env.local like that. And we have two variables in here. First variable is the next public API URL, which is again our local host. And then we have our Versal URL, which when we deploy is going to be the URL that we get from Versal, but that's any of these basically that you can whitelist. So that's how it would work. Because we obviously local host, we want 3001 because that's what we're using. And now let me save this. If we go back in here, again, I'll put in the O in here. This will be whatever we deploy it as. But in our scenario now, it's basically public API URL, which we can verify as command FV, which is localhost 3001. So that's fine. We can add this one in after, or just delete this for now. We then are doing a await fetch with the base path slash API slash destinations and then slash the ID that we pass in, which we get from the page. So that is how it would work. If response is not okay, then obviously we handle that. We can just return null or you can throw an error, whatever you want to do. You can put this in a try catch block. But I just wanted to keep it as simple as possible. Then we just return response.json. So that is essentially what happens. And then all we need to do is console log the destination that we have in here. So the destination is going to be the single one. So let me just save that. And let me just actually do individual so we can differentiate. And the response will be, if you hover over this, is a object of destination or it will return null. So again, if you want to find the type, you can just hover over it and then you can just put that in here as well like that. Import in the type like so. Save that. And then it says reload env.local in here. So now all I want to do is see in the console that everything is working. So let me just delete the API part in the URL, and essentially we should get Barley back, this object here. So let me just press enter, go in the console. You can see the ID is correct. So in console, you can see an object is returned from the server. If you look here, what has essentially happened is if you look in the fetch file, this is coming from the server like so. What we want to do is we want to log out individual destination. This one in here is Barley in here. So you can see that everything is working correctly. Now all we need to do is render out the information, which is if we press back and let's go into Barley, and we just need to render out the UI, which will be static content because this is all happening on the server. So therefore, we have the information on the server. So therefore, we can pass this down as static content to the browser itself. So that's the beauty of Next.js is we can think about, for example, this page can be static content, whereas the destinations page, for example, is going to be client side. So this will always be client side because we're using the use effect and so on with the use client keyword at the top of the component. So now if we go into New York, for example, this is server rendered. So when we run the build, it generates all the static pages for us already. And in this scenario, the static pages will already be generated. So all we need to do now is we have the information in here, so we just need to render it out. So let me just essentially go back in our code in destination slash ID in the page in here. We're rendering out the individual destination like so. So all we need to do now is if we go into destinations, I believe we need to create a component. So let me just check, which we will do. So let me just paste everything in here. And what we now need to do is we're importing in the fetch destinations at the top. If there's not a destination, we have the fallback in here of destination not found. Or what you can actually do is do the not found keyword, like so, from Next.js, which basically navigates you to obviously the custom 404 page that we have. But I'm just going to keep it as the text for now because we want to stay on the same page. Then we have this destination info component. We don't need React fragments around it. So let me just save that. And now what we need to do is create this component for destination info. So let me just essentially copy and bring that in. So I can just paste that into my components folder like so. And you can see we have a destination info type, so which we need to create. So let me go ahead and create that, which is quite simple. I'll just copy it across, which is of type destination or null. So we have the types file in here. Let me just paste that in, is of type destination or null. All we need to do now is import this in. This again will all be static content. We're not using use client in here, so just keep that in mind. This will be server side. We're just essentially rendering everything out. So now what we need to do is again optional chain everything because we want to make sure nothing fails and we don't get a white screen. So now you can see we've rendered our individual destinations page and we have also created the API as well. So finally, what we want to do is look at the reviews page, and this is where we will be going further into the crash course itself. We've covered most of the stuff, so we've covered all of this stuff here. We've implemented the not found page, we built the custom 404 page, we've created the reusable header component and Tailwind styling. We've also worked on environment variables. We haven't deployed yet. What we want to do next is look at how we would add middleware in, and it's as simple as you think. And then finally, we just need to cover the React Server Actions, which will be a whole section in itself. So we will do the middleware next.